Ik heb één in de wagen, maar nee, maar nee, dat zou niet in de kant komen dan. Ik kan mij nog, ik kan deze toch nog
ja, na de
Ja,
Sounds very good.
That gives,
technically, I'm a senior consultant architect, but it's fine. Solution architect.
Thank you all for being here. Because we have some French friends and customers as well. Not going to take too much of your time, just going to introduce you to Dan, who you will probably all know. The topic of today is a very hot topic. He's become air, and I'm sure that it will be a very informative and pleasant afternoon.
You're making some big promises.
So welcome everybody. Anyway, we will do the presentation in English. So well, Tom is not yet speaking Dutch. He's learning.
I can do it in Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, or Spanish. So
Exactly.
I don't think I'm just some English guy who can't speak anything.
Yeah. So if everybody wants to learn in Danish.
Speak a little Danish, go.
Okay. So just very from Sony's side, we are actually 4 people, I have to say. So on my left we have Christian Brantigam, who is a product specialist for shoulder cameras and cameras, studio cameras, and so on. Then we have Tom Crocker, who is a senior solution architect, something like that. But basically, he's our XD camera specialist, so that's the reason why he was so friendly to come over to Belgium and join us. And then we have David Treves, who is user experience specialist, who is also joining us today from a user experience point of view, I imagine. So that's it from my side. I will leave the word to Tom now to tell you all the beautiful and nice things I have to say about the camera. So thank you.
Hopefully so. Hello everyone. For those who haven't seen me at various trade shows and things, I'm very easy to spot at trade shows and people tend to remember me for one reason or another. I will talk about XDCAM Air and where that's up to. We've been developing it for a number of years now, and it's now ready. It's a very, very compelling system. If you've got questions throughout, just ask them. Just interrupt me or shout at me if it's boring, then tell me so, and I'll tell some lies until you think it's interesting or something. But we'll get through it together. But yeah, like I say, questions, just fire them at me and things like that, and we'll all get through it. It's much easier if it's a discussion. I don't think this is an unmanageable number of people to be progressing in that style. Unfortunately, I'm sat here because if I stand up, I inevitably block that, and I need to operate this laptop, which means that I'm in this strange sort of middle world of looking down here while trying to talk to you up there. I apologise for that, but we'll get through it, like I say. So, that's a slide with my name on it. What is XDCAM now? Because, yeah, as we go through this, I'll explain why I'm going through this. But XDCAM, as it always has been, is the name for Sony's file-based ENG style, documentary style cameras that record files as opposed to tapes. That's all XDCAM is. It's nothing to do with the codec. XDCAM was never a codec. The codec was always MP250. Oh, I do want to use a pointer. What fun. I have a pointer, but I always leave it. Remote control, all this fun stuff. Excellent. In that case, for this part at least, I can stand up and go over here. Hopefully, not yet. I've been a bit too quick. I'll keep pressing this until it does work. Air is Clever Cloud Services. That's basically it. Everyone's doing something in the cloud these days. We thought we would too. The point is, the fundamental reason for XDCam Air is to take a step back and look at what a camera is actually for. That's the main thing. We at Sony are incredibly good at going, here's a camera. It is 4K, it is HDR, it has these codecs in it, it has this many channels of audio. And we forget sometimes that's not why you have cameras. It might be why you replace cameras, but it's not why you have them in the first place. Obviously it isn't. It works now. So, the reason you have cameras is because you have one of these. This is a production environment, and it's a very badly designed production environment if you look at it too closely. But fundamentally, you want a camera to put stuff into this to get stuff out of that so that you've got a deliverable, be that a program or a news story or whatever that might be. So in that context, and to understand what XDCam Air is really for, we need to look at a camera as the resources that it generates or that it is comprised of that contribute to this. That's the main thing. And in that context, you've got 6 main things that we've identified. Obviously, you have high-res footage. High-res footage goes in, and it goes in here, and it goes around, and you get a program out the other side. But there's other bits to it. That's the most immediately obvious one. But we're thinking about everything that can influence this. So we can look at proxy footage. Almost all of our cameras these days write proxies simultaneously. So those can also influence that workflow. Things like metadata are very, very significant. There's never been a convincing way of getting metadata into a camera beforehand. We've tried it before. There were systems like XMPilot, and in some contexts that worked really well. In others, it didn't work so well because maybe the operators didn't have the time to do that, or they didn't want to, or something like that. There needed to be a more sensible way of getting the planning, which happens over here, and the production, which happens over here, and the shooting, which happens over here, to all link together in a sensible way. Previously, clips would come back, and you'd have to go, right, well, this, and then look back at the planning and go, right, well, these need to go here, and these need to go here, and these need to be organized in this way. So metadata also organizes, it influences a production environment. Beyond that, you've also got streams. The reason I mention streams as the 4th thing is because usually when we say we've got network stuff in our cameras, people go, oh, are you streaming? It's like, yeah, well, we are streaming, but that's not fundamentally what this is for. This is not a system, I hasten to add. I'm not going to any customer and going, you need to throw out all your live views or your TV views or your Digeros or whatever. We're not here to replace those. Those are there to replace satellite trucks. We're not going to build that into a camera. It doesn't really make sense. We also don't think it's the future, but I'll come back to that later. So, of course, you can take live streams, and they're well assembled. They're very good-looking live streams out of cameras as well. And they can influence a workflow, any type of workflow. So they're also important. But also a couple of more esoteric things. Things like the status of the camera, so where a camera is, what it's doing, what codec it's recording in, and therefore also the configuration of the camera. If you think about it, if you've got one camera out of 10 that's contributing to something and it's configured wrong, you know that's going to influence the hell out of what happens in that workflow. So all of these different aspects within a camera are things that you might want to either know about or modify or send to or take out of or fiddle with in some way with a camera that's truly network connected. So that's basically what we're trying to do. Again, it's just illustrative, this is not a proper workflow. The point is that anybody who needs a resource within a camera should have access to that resource as soon as that resource exists. That's what XDCam Air is about. It is the bridge that turns a camera from a camera into a properly network attached device, something that is integrated into the workflow. So let's tidy up a bit. And this, from here, I'll explain what XDCam Air sort of looks like. You have all of your production stuff over there. You have your cameras over here. Now I've done away with the camera icon completely. The camera icon itself isn't important. Stuff in it is important. And there's the gap. Unless you're very, very lucky, particularly news is unlikely to happen where your production environment is. So there's this, which is a physical gap, it's a temporal gap, so there's time and there's space, and it's generally causing problems, slowing you down, costing money in various different ways. So we bridge it with XDCAM Air on Amazon Web Services. We have up there a range of different services that comprise XDCAM Air, and I'll show you a proper demo afterwards. This bit isn't long, I don't like spending too much time on PowerPoint. But basically, we then have a secure connection from the camera, and we route all of the different bits that you might name into the correct component within XDCAM Air. On the other side, before I go through those components, we have gateway services and APIs. I've never been to a broadcaster, and for any of you who I've already visited, you will have heard me say this line before. I repeat these lines a lot because they're quite good. No one has ever said to me, Tom, we want more interfaces to achieve what we're doing. If I come in with a new feature, that new feature really, ideally, should be integrated into whatever you're using already. You don't want to have to go here to get this, to move it to here, to cause that to happen, if it could just turn up where you needed it immediately and automatically. That's largely what my job is these days. It's building systems that do that. And the nice thing about XDCAM Air is we've built it with that in mind. So there are gateway services and a very fully featured API. We've already got customers and other third parties developing against that API. To get all of these features, get access to all of that stuff in the systems that they're using over there. That's very straightforward. And on our Hive system, which we showed off at IBC and we'll be showing off in a more advanced state at NAB in April, we've integrated pretty much everything in there so that the camera itself becomes an always accessible part of the production system. Anyway, the bits that comprise XDCAM Air. The first bit is a web interface. I know I've just been talking about APIs. Of course, you don't have to use the APIs if you don't want to. There is a web interface for it, which you log into and you can access all the different features. You'll certainly always use the web interface for configuration and things like that, but that's how you talk to the platform to start. There's the least sexy of the modules within it, which is the connection management module, and it looks after the cameras, it says hello to them, it sends them tasks, it receives feedback from them, all of that kind of management stuff. It's not exciting, but it's obviously very important. We then have the streaming receiver and distributor, so from any camera or indeed any app that's connected, we can get streams and we can send them to one place or we can send them to many places. We can decode them in hardware if we want to do them really fast, or we can decode them in software and send them absolutely anywhere with no hardware. Right now, that camera is streaming to YouTube via XDCAM Air. Don't worry, nobody has the address of that. I don't think I've ever published it. I just looked at it from my Creator Studio. But that's going through, and there's lots of hardware, but it's in Dublin. It's not your hardware, it's not in Iraq, you're not paying for air conditioning or electricity for it. Well, ultimately you are, but not like that. Anyway, so being up there means that we can basically have an unlimited number of inputs and an unlimited number of outputs. Because if it's election day, you can scale up to 200 cameras and 200 outputs if you want to, that's fine. And that's the nice thing about scalable cloud infrastructure. And there's a CMS. CMS is the file handling platform. It's where files and cameras go. It is also where we can go and look at the contents of a camera, and I'll show you that in the demo as well. We can play back clips, we can edit them a bit, we can make subclips, we can change metadata, simple functions like that. Some of those become much more exciting once we talk about those in the context of what we can do via the API, but I'll come to that when I'm doing the demo. And finally is the metadata handler. And this is where we can, for example, and I'll show you how this works, we can hook XDCAM Air into a planning service, an NRCS in this case. I'll show you how it's connected to an EMPS that we have running, and we can create a story in that. The EMPS sends a MOS message to our gateway service, which converts it to a planning metadata file, which the cameras can understand, and we can then publish that file out to a user, out to a camera. Once that file is out there, then any clip that is shot will carry all of that metadata back again. And of course, if that clip then comes back to the CMS, we could, for example, have that filtered by story or whatever and define where we wanted it to go and who we wanted it to see and who needed to approve and all kinds of fun stuff that we might want to do on the way in, which normally would only happen if someone had modified that file and provided that metadata somehow. All of that could be dealt with. So, the summary of this part, this presentation is really long, but I'm not going to go through all of it, so I'd rather talk to you. By connecting the cameras via the different services within XDCAM and your production environment, we can create hundreds of exciting next-generation workflows. Usually I'm quite careful with marketing phrases like that. I'm an engineer, I don't like things like next-generation workflows because I know that they sound scary. They are scary, but it's true. They're really exciting. And generally, when I show people the ideas around it, they go away and they think for a couple of weeks, and they come back and they say, could we do this, this, and this, and this? My job really at Sony is when you come back with those ideas to try and realize those. That's what I actually do. And lots of presentations like this, of course. But that fundamentally is the overview of XDCAM and what I wanted to tell you about it in PowerPoint form before we look at something real. Are there any questions so far? Excellent, I've been very thorough. So, let's look at XDCAM Air. So, like I said, we had the, yeah, I said it was you guys, it's mostly just you who's on there. There's a bit of a delay there because it's coming back through. Hold on, somewhere. Yeah, all the way around. If I do that. At the moment, the delay is switched on quite long to make it prettier. Anyway, so this is XDCAM, this is the interface, and we've got various different functions across the top here. This is the live window. We can see all of our different groups down here. I've got a couple of customers there who are trying it at the moment. Groups are, I won't spend too long talking about them because it's not particularly sexy, but it is quite important. If, for example, you had different regions or different projects, I can see all of these groups because I'm an administrator. If you're not an administrator, you can only see the group that you're in or others that you have permission to be in. Within a group, you can put transmitters, like cameras or phones. You can put receivers, like RTMP outputs, MPEG-2 outputs, or RX1 servers for SDI output. You can put planning systems. Basically, any resource in it is organized by groups. I can see all of them because I'm the admin. So if, for example, one of my customers in the UK, they would have a Manchester group and a London group, and London could see all of their London cameras, Manchester could see all their Manchester cameras, but you'd need to ask someone special if you wanted to pull a feed from a Manchester camera to a London feed. You can do that, absolutely. But basically I'm saying that all of the standard sort of user management type stuff that you would expect is there. So here we have our inputs, and these are the ones that are currently online, and we can see, even though I'm not streaming from them, so this is David's phone, this is this David right here, that's his phone. He's streaming via something called XDCAM Pocket, which is an app which is available on the App Store and iOS. I wouldn't expect to see it for Symbian or BlackBerry or any of those. iOS and Android should probably do it, but it's available and downloadable. The app itself is free. I'll talk about how the subscriptions and things work later, but basically you pay to receive it, not to disseminate the app. That's for whoever wants it. If you give them your login details, then they can log into your platform. It's very straightforward. That can stream in a couple of nice different resolutions. It can do H.264, and if the phone's got the right chipset, which David's doesn't, it can also do H.265. H.265 is coming in the platform for the streaming all over the place because it's quite sort of exciting and nice, high quality, good for streaming. Not for production codecs yet. They haven't settled on it too much. If I look at offline, we can see all of the cameras that we have associated with this, and we have a range of different apps. So there's my phone, for example. I can look at them this way if I want to. It's not so much online at the moment. Christian's app is on, but he had it set to shoot clips, I think, because the app can also shoot clips and upload them. I'll show you in a moment. We can see where stuff is, so I don't know how far off that is, but it's probably not a million miles away from where we are. I can also look at where all of my cameras are, or at least where they were. So with the white S, they're currently switched on. With the dark S, this is their last known location. So for example, we can see we've got Zlatanov's phone down there, and all of these different things. Now this stuff is interesting, and it's useful enough to know where your stuff is. When you start thinking about it, particularly in the context of news and some of the more modern planning systems, some of you might have heard of a company called WolfTech, for example, who do a very, very story-centric, map-based resource allocation tool. So for them to be able to get the information on where a camera is, because in their world, a story starts with a location, and you then see, okay, well, it will recommend that this car is closest, so therefore it should cover this story, and you have a freelancer this far away, and this is his number. Do you want to send him a mail based on this? By being able to loop in all of the XDCam Air stuff, not only can you find out where all of your camera resources are, but you could also, for example, send out all of the metadata to them. So there's a lot of stuff that we can open up that we're not going to build. We're not going to get into the world of newsroom planning systems. Other people do that better. But we are very keen to integrate with these different services. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with these things beyond simply streaming. So if we have a look at, let's go back to just my online cameras, we can look at the X500, which is the one over here. We can see that it's streaming at the moment. We can see what bitrate that's running at. We can see if there's any QoS loss going on, and QoS loss measures. I'll talk a little bit about the codec and our streaming strategy, actually. I do diverge on these tangents. I hope I always come back to where I originally started. If people notice that I haven't, do just tell me and do that. We at Sony think we're pretty good at designing codecs. We've been doing it for a very long time. Almost everything that you watch anywhere is probably produced at some point with some of our codecs somewhere. And of course, streaming became important. People were very, very keen to be able to stream from their cameras, so we developed a very clever way of doing it. And that is based on something we call our QoS technology. I apologize for Japan's branding of it to any IT-minded people who know that QoS already means something else. I know you're right. I can't do anything about it. We call it QoS. The quality of service message does actually work, though. We send, from a simple point of view, we send as much data as we can, so we just use UDP to throw as much data as we can at the receiver, and then we try and decode it. Now, we can, through a couple of other open ports of TCP over the top, re-request bits if we're missing it. But first, we'll try and rebuild it as though it was video. So we'll look at adjacent frames and see if we can make a solid guess about what's missing, and if we can do it that way, because that's much faster. Of course, there's forward error correction and things like that, and we can change the delay, and we can adjust the bandwidth, and we can adjust the raster, and we can adjust the frame rate, and all of this kind of stuff. We can even go all the way down to 64 kilobits before it drops the audio. So it's pretty robust. We also won't re-request a packet if there's a less than 80% chance of that information getting back in time to be played out, because that would also be a waste of bandwidth. There's some other stuff in there as well, but that's basically what underpins it. The reason we've done that as well is because we're not betting on lots and lots of SIMs. We don't want to build a system as Sony that uses 4, 8, 16 SIMs. We're not going to. Most of our cameras now will either work with an accessory that allows us to use 2, and the most recent ones have 2 built in. We're not going to go beyond 2, partly because other people are already doing that, and those systems already work with our cameras. It's fine, you probably already have them. It's a waste of our time going, look, here's something that's not quite the same, and that's really quite expensive and that kind of thing. What we're looking to build is a system that can be in every camera that you have. Those backpacks are, as I said earlier, they're replacements for SNG trucks, they're replacements for microwave vans, they're replacements for big systems that you plan. They're a resource that you send somewhere because you know something's going to happen or you suspect something is going to happen. But like the old story, the best camera is the one that you have with you, that might not be where news is happening. And the other thing that everybody hates is having different workflows for different cameras and different tools. So this one works like this, but this one and this one, they have a different mechanism for communicating with us. They shoot in a different way, they do a different thing. So really what we were looking for was as much consistency as possible in systems that are sensible to integrate in cameras. Now, if you think where we're going 5 years from now, Sony is one of the oldest electronics companies in the world. I know we look a bit old sometimes, but we're still quite clever at designing stuff. And we've managed that by designing pretty good stuff overall. So we do have quite a long perspective. And the long perspective this time is, if we're in a 5G world with things, there's a lot of exciting stuff people are talking about, like fixed low Earth orbit satellite internet and things like that. Google and various others are having these enormous Wi-Fi tests with sort of a gigabit in both directions with a radius of 4 kilometers, things like that. If we're in a world with that kind of wireless connectivity, with H.265 and really connectivity everywhere, potentially IPv6 routing with very, very low ping times from device to device, is a separate backpack with a subscription of many thousands per month with 8 SIMs in it, with its own power supply and an SDI cable, really the right way of doing things? It certainly is at the moment. If you have to go live for something absolutely mission critical, I don't want you to throw away your boxes. I think you'll find this will work just fine, but I know that sounds risky at the moment. So I'm not going to say throw away your boxes, but you don't have, no, I said this once, and one broadcaster said, yes, actually we do have a live view for every single camera. I've only ever met one company that does that. Nobody else does, because it's a really expensive way of doing things. What we have is a number of different workflows that can probably complement in more interesting ways. Certainly in ways that we can integrate into a camera in order to make the setup simple. That's what it's for. It's for spreading to everything that you have. So, I've now forgotten where I diverged from, only that I did diverge from something earlier. Anyone remember what that was? No? Fine. That means I can make it up. So we've got a few other windows over here. We've got remote control, so on this camera here I can do things. Like I say, the way that I've got the streaming set up, there's a bit of a delay on it, but if I start fiddling with the zoom, for example, if you... What's that?
Live is there.
Live is where?
On this morning.
Ah, yeah, okay. If you can swing it around a little bit further, and perhaps hold it up so that they can see that I'm fiddling with the zoom. Anyway, some of you will be able to see that the lens is moving about as I do that. The features on here are mostly set up as the kind of single operator going out with the camera on the tripod. I can't get it set up right. Can you check if my shot's okay? So that the white balance can be set and things like that. There are in the cameras protocols for a lot of other different functions that we can put in there. We just haven't yet. If you want rec trigger and playback and things like that, we can do it. Telling your camera operators that you can override their record button presses isn't going to make them super happy, but neither is this, so maybe you don't tell them. If you're a camera operator and you're here, there's a menu option that lets you block this out if you want to. Likewise, the GPS. Camera operators hate the GPS, management love the GPS. So it's one of those things, we give you the keys, you have to work that out yourself. Anyway, and that's basically the streaming. So we can see on the receiver side here, that's my stream output. If I jump out here, 11, we can have a look at that there. That'll catch up because I haven't opened that tab for ages. Live stream health fine, come on. Yeah, come back to it. We've also got various servers, so we've got hardware in Prague. Oh, thank you. That'll be that clicker that I stopped using 20 minutes ago. We've got hardware in Prague. One of the things I will say about the streaming is that we can decode it in the cloud, but that takes a lot longer. The fastest we can do it is we have a server, and that server integrates into this absolutely flawlessly. So that's a server, ports 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 of 1. There's another one that's currently in Ljubljana, another one that's currently in Belgrade. And on those, because we're decoding in hardware, we can decode at the fastest at 1.5 seconds end to end. And when I say that, I really mean 1.5 seconds. We've done it from a camera in London controlled in Las Vegas to a play out in Tokyo, which is a bloody long way. And we've done that at 1.5 seconds. So 1.5 seconds is 1.5 seconds. If you absolutely have to go live. We can also do that delay at 3, 5, or 10 seconds if you want to have more time for that. And of course, there's dynamic bandwidth scaling, things like that on top. If you're decoding in the cloud, of course we can do that too, but that then means that the stream goes up, gets decoded, gets re-encoded as RTMP, gets forwarded to whatever's playing out, which re-decodes it and then re-encodes it to show it to you in HTML5 or whatever it's actually displaying as. So of course the delay there is much longer. There it's coming up on 25 seconds, but we're working on getting that slightly further down. But of course if it's over, generally we find that 1.5 seconds is acceptable for two-way. Anything above that starts to get a bit tricky. But it depends what you're covering. Which leads me quite nicely to my next bit. Now the next bit I'm going to talk about, I'm going to skip planning for the moment, I'm going to go straight to asset. The next bit is, of course, proxy workflows. Now, proxy workflows are really, really powerful. We can do an awful lot with them. Because for those who are familiar with XDCAM disk, we had proxies on those. They were about 1.5 megabits of MPEG-2, and they were pretty ugly. They were there because when we released MPEG-2 on disk, it was really, really heavy for computers of the day to decode. We needed this proxy to do that. Proxies these days aren't for that. Proxies these days are to accelerate a workflow in a different way. So these go all the way up to 1920, 1080, I50 at up to 9 megabits. On the two new cameras, it'll do the same megabits, but in H.265 as well. So there's a range of different flavors that you can choose from. And the key thing there is, for most of my customers, that's perfectly broadcastable. We'll do 6 or 9 megabits at that rate. So if you've got to go live, if you've really got to be, it's happening right now, fine, go live, do that. If you've got 1 minute, send the proxy, because the proxy will frequently, when transferring, catch up to the stream. If you've got more bandwidth, of course, it'll upload faster. It doesn't upload while recording. That is a caveat I'll happily admit to. But if you can send the proxy, it means firstly, if you've got, for example, a web team, which most people do these days, who want to get news out onto your web platform or any other web platform as quickly as humanly possible, firstly, they're not going to care about a 50 megabit 422 master, they just want some footage. Secondly, of course, it's far higher quality than you're actually broadcasting out to their homes. If you've got 9 megabits coming in, by the time people have seen it, certainly over terrestrial broadcast in digital, what I think BBC One HD, which is the most powerfully or heavily bit-rated channel out to people's homes, is about 4 megabits. And it will have been through a few other procedures before then anyway. So certainly for getting the news out quickly, it's fine. It's a whole lot better than that shaky phone stuff that people submit, and everyone's happy to play that out. The other thing is, of course, this stuff comes with full metadata. So it carries all of the metadata that the high-res file has, plus one extra bit, which is the unique media identifier of the high-res file, so that it can be relinked in the workflow later. So that means that whatever happens with the high-res, however you try and get it back, if that comes back at the end of the day on a card, or if they get back to a hotel and upload it, or if you decide to pull it out of the camera, because we can do that too, it means that the sequence that you played out to start with can be automatically conformed, and that can be managed ideally in the background. If everything's hitting the same ingest point, you can say, okay, well, when the proxy arrives, create me an asset and wait for this unit. If you ever see this unit, this is the same as this file, appended as the high-res version of the asset, and just swap the resolutions over in the background for me. In our Hive system, it does exactly that already. We were showing it at IBC 6 months ago. 4 months ago. So that kind of workflow is far more robust than a streaming workflow. I used to work with a number of people here at Avid over the years, a long time ago before I was at Sony, so I'm a file-based guy. I like files, I don't like streams because they're inherently unreliable. They've got a purpose, but a lot of the time when I talk to people about when they have a requirement for streaming, it's a requirement to get things out very, very fast, but that's only because it's streaming or waiting until they drive back. There's nothing in between. If there's a file-based workflow that makes sense that's this much slower than streaming, that's frequently the one that they go for. Because it's cheaper, it's more sensible, it allows for a more robust workflow, it allows for better conforming functions, better archiving functions, search and retrieval, distribution. There's so much that's nicer about a collection of files than there is about a stream.
Have you already worked with newsroom system vendors to integrate that metadata in their systems?
We have 3 of them working already, and Wolftech are currently under development. So I will show you in a moment the EMPS integration. We also have an open media integration. We can do a bit with iNews. iNews is a bit restricted because of the slightly inconvenient and half-assed way that they decided to implement MOS. So really what we're doing, for the enthusiasts in the room, is we're listening for MOS 2.8.4 with a row story send command under it. We then pick up row story send, take everything out of that and map it to a planning metadata XML, which we then publish to the camera. I haven't tried it with anything but those 3 systems. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't work with anything else. But likewise, the API is out there. If there's anyone who has a specific integration that they want, I will put you in touch with the API development team. It's very straightforward process.
In Wolftech integration.
Wolftech are currently building it, and I mean that quite literally today. On the 6th, which is next week after, there is a demonstration at the DPP, the Digital Production Partnership in London, where we will be showing a combined workflow between XD Camera and Wolftech.
Will the footage of that become available afterwards?
I suspect probably only to DPP members. I don't know.
We'll see.
I know it's not secret, but aside from that, I don't know. It's up to the DPP. I just have to turn up and talk about XD Camera some more. Anyway, yeah. So that's where we're at with that. But again, the API is very much, if someone wants to develop for this, of course we want them to develop for this. That's fine. This is not... Fortunately, enough of the people who were running Sony in the 80s have now retired that we are actually able to be quite open now. There was some significant difficulties before when we were this monstrous behemoth, and it made sense when we could sell a camera for 100,000 euros, and you'd buy a deck for 100,000 euros and 3 tapes a day at 60 euros each, and then buy service contracts on top. Unfortunately, our cameras break much more rarely now since there's no moving parts in them and you only need 1 memory card. So being a closed system doesn't really work anymore, particularly for a service like this. We need to be as open as we can, and we're actively doing that. So yeah, it's working well. It's early days for it. We had the very first XDCAM Air Developer Conference at NAB last year, and where we had, I'd say, 30 or 40 different vendors who came to that. So Avid were there, Grass Valley were there, Octopus were there, lots of others. Most of Hall 7 from IBC were there. So yeah, it's whatever you want. We've got customers doing their own integrations into it as well. So it's exciting. Anyway, so here is the asset window. And again, I'll show you around what it does. So this is loading up the clip, and oh look, it's all of you having coffees before. Isn't that amazing? I shot that on my phone while I was setting up. There's David. He didn't want to be filmed. There he is. There we are, back again. Again, that was from the app. The app can stream, but it can also send files. It's important to know that. But then, of course, we get full metadata as well. And if you want to see different metadata, we can see different metadata. I can enable different profiles. This is fundamentally just mapping one XML to another XML. But they'll turn up and we can write stuff in here if we want to. Or if it's pre-populated, all of that can be viewed as well. we can play through and we can put in markers. Look, there's David. Look, how about that? We can modify the names of the markers and things like that. David, hooray! He loves the camera. There we go. And then we've got that. And that's a traditional Sony locator piece of metadata. Most things already read those, so that's fairly straightforward. We can make sequences. We can do all of that stuff. Here's a slightly more interesting clip. This was us getting trapped behind this guy who was delivering something for 20 minutes this morning. While we just sat there. And there he is, the lazy bastard. And,
Breaking news.
Well, I mean, the thing is, the nice thing about Pocket, one of my customers I was talking to about it, he was the head of news at a major British broadcaster, but not that one. And he was trapped on a train that had come off the rails. And they were trapped on there for 4.5 hours. And he was on there. And he could see his own crew outside reporting on it. But he could have sent something from inside the train if he'd been able to do it from his phone, which he now could have. So his thought is, well, I don't want to give it just to my journalist. I'll give it to everyone in the building. If they've got a contract with the company I work for, I'm giving it to the receptionist, I'm giving it to anybody. So that if anything interesting happens where they are, we've got that much more reach. We've got that many touch points all over the place that allow us to gather news. And the key thing about the app, and I go on about it a bit, people can play around with it later. I'm happy for people to download them. We can connect it, I'll show you how it works. The key thing about it is that it allows for grown-up workflows. The app end is very, very simple. It's got a button, you press it and it goes. That's basically it. You press the other button and then it shoots clips instead, but then you press the button and it goes. That's basically it. But you get proper metadata with it. You can set file naming conventions. Soon, not just yet, but soon you'll also be able to send metadata out to apps as well. For people who try app contribution, and most broadcasters have people who submit stuff from phones. That's pretty normal these days. There's MojoCon that Shade regularly goes to where senior journalists get together to discuss submitting stuff from apps. I'm yet to meet anyone who's done it to any scale and hasn't ended up with an FTP full of files called mov001.mp4. And that's a difficult thing to do. And if you try and scale that out, you just end up with a lot of files called mov0, well, then you get mov001.1.mp4. And that becomes quite tricky. If you have proper metadata on it, you can group it by location, you can group it by this, that, whatever, you can do all of that stuff. And you can start to do that kind of automation and more rigorous quality control over what's coming in. Quality control is a significant issue. Since anyone can just turn up on YouTube and present news now, that's a significant thing. Anyway, so that's that. I mean, we can subclip, we can do sort of fairly standard, not particularly sexy functions with clips. They become much more interesting when we think about what we can do through the API, though. Particularly when you combine them with what we can do with the transfer window. So if I go into transfer, I can see which cameras are online, and it's only with the X500 at the moment. But look, we can see some clips. Now these clips haven't been uploaded. These are clips that are in the camera. And from here, I can hit proxy transfer, or I can hit high-res transfer, and I can get those clips to me. If I hit proxy transfer on there, it will add to job list, and I can look at the job list, and it'll be on there, and it's going to upload that once I stop streaming, because it won't do both of those. The new one will. The Z280 will actually stream and upload at the same time. But that's that. The other thing I can do, which is quite